Hi everyone. This is our last video for section 2.1 and we're talking about bar graphs. So bar graphs are used for categorical or qualitative data. So this is data that's non-numeric or data I cannot do meaningful math with. And you can see here we're looking at the categorical variable nicest fruit. So we asked people what they thought the nicest fruit was. You'll notice in these examples that the bars can be vertical or horizontal. So the one in the upper right corner, we have the frequency on the x-axis, and we have the categories on the y-axis, and that produces horizontal bars. And then you'll notice at this graph at the bottom, we have the categories on the x and the frequency on the y, which is what we did for our line graph, and that produces vertical bars. You will see me default to vertical bar charts because the other graphs that involve bars are all strictly vertical, and so I find that consistency soothing. But both vertical and horizontal are valid, and that's really an aesthetic choice up to the person writing the report. So we're going to do an example, and then I've got a try it on your own problem for you to try. So for this example, it says the columns in the table on the right contain the race or ethnicity of students in the U.S. public schools for the class of 2011, percentages for the AP examinee population for that class, and percentages for the overall student population. Create a bar graph with student race or ethnicity, qualitative data on the x-axis, and the AP examinee population percentages on the y. So they're asking us to make a bar graph, and they've given us a qualitative variable, which is race or ethnicity. And you can see that they've assigned numbers to it, but those numbers don't have any mathematical meaning. They are effectively labels for us to make graphing easier. But this is nominative data, not ordinal data. There's no ranking here. That just is the order they showed up in the table. And then we have two columns, the proportion of AP examinees from each category, and then the proportion from the overall population for each category. So for example, that first row, Asian American, and Pacific Islander students are 5.7% of the U.S. public school population, but they made up 10.3% of the AP examinee population. So to make our bar graph, we're going to put the qualitative variable on one axis, the numeric data on another. I'm going to default to vertical bars, so I'm going to put my categories on the x and my numeric variable on the y. And you'll notice I'm circling AP examinee population because that's what they asked us for here. So they didn't mention overall student population. It's a bar chart for ethnicity versus examinee population. So let's get that grid set up. So I did this one by hand. You can see I have my two axes. I have the categorical data on the x, race and ethnicity, and you'll notice that I used the numbers that we assigned in the table for my axis labels just for simplicity. It's safe to do that as long as you have a key somewhere. In this example, my data table is right next to my graph, so the key is very clear. 1 represents Asian American, and Pacific Islanders. 2 represents Black or African Americans. 3 represents Hispanic or Latino. So there is a key off to the side that tells me what those symbols represent in terms of my categories. And then on the y-axis, I know my smallest percentage is almost 0, and my largest percentage is almost 60. And so I scaled my axis from 0 to 60, and I counted by 5s. So every box is 5. So 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. And I only labeled the 10s, so it's nice and easy to read. So first bar is going to go for category 1. That's this first row. And I need a box that's at about 10% tall. So that first green bar tells me that Asian American, and Pacific Islanders are approximately 10% of the AP examinee population. When I go to draw my second bar, I'm going to skip a block and then make my next box right here. I'm also going to make my next box 2 boxes wide. And for row 2, Black and African Americans make up 9% of the AP examinee population. So just a little bit less than that 10%. Moving on to 3, for the third category, I need a height of 17, so right about here. For 4, I need a height of 0.6, so that's going to be really tiny, a little bit less than 1. 5 is at 57.1%, so that's all the way up here, a little bit above 55. And then 6 is not reported or other at 6%, so right here, just a little bit above 5. And that is not tall enough, and I apologize. I will go back and fix that, but that should be just a little bit bigger than 5. One thing that's important to notice, other than my typo, obviously, is that the bars do not touch. For bar charts, there should always be a gap between the bars because these categories are not continuous. You'll also notice that my bars are 2 boxes wide. My gap is 1 box wide. That's not a hard and fast rule, but that is fairly common. We want to make sure our graph is readable, but that we're not wasting excessive amounts of space. So you have a little bit of wiggle room in terms of judgment for how much space is between bars, but there does need to be a clear gap. This is qualitative, non-continuous data. We need a gap between those bars. Okay, so I've got to try it. The population in Park City is made up of children, working age adults, and retirees. The table on the right shows the 3 age groups, the number of people in the town from each age group, and the proportion or percentage of people in each age group. Construct a bar graph showing the proportions. And then we see our table here: age group, children, working age adults, retirees, number of people, also frequency, and proportion of population, or relative frequency. They're asking you to do a bar graph for the proportion, which is this last column, the percentage. So you're going to construct a bar graph of age versus proportion. I'd encourage you to pause the video and try it on your own. I'm going to go ahead and pop up a solution and we can talk about it. So here is my bar graph for this data set. Just like the last bar graph, you'll notice I've got age groups. I've got my categorical label on one axis. I've got my numeric label on the other. Again, you'll notice that there is a gap between each of those bars. And we can see children a little bit less than 20, working age adults a little bit more than 40, retirees a little bit less than 40. So the heights of those bars accurately represent the proportion of the population. This looks a little bit different than the last one because this one is computer generated. I actually did this chart in Google Sheets. If you're familiar with Google Sheets, you can always do your graphs using that as a tool. I linked on the links and videos page for week 1 a whole list of how-to videos on how to use Google Sheets to make these graphs. So if you would prefer to do them digitally rather than by hand, that is an option, and that information is on Canvas. Okay, if you have any questions on bar graphs, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you in our next video.